The SZONDI test is one of the most unusual tests in psychology that you will ever encounter. And it's an interesting artifact of the history of psychology. And in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the origin of the SZONDI test and the psychometric properties of the SZONDI, such as they're measured in the 1950s. The SZONDI test dates to 1935. It was created by Leopold Szondi, a psychoanalyst who's relatively unknown today. But at the time that he developed the test, he was considered the third pillar of the psychoanalytic community, along with Freud and Jung. Maybe not quite as famous as those two, but definitely highly regarded and respected within the psychoanalytic community in the early 20th century. He was born in Slovakia in a small town about 100 miles from Budapest. And during World War II, this is an interesting historical footnote. Szondi and his family were captured by the Nazis, transported to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Prognosis seemed pretty grim, but it was the fact that he was well known within the community of analysts and highly regarded even by American psychologists, that a group of Americans got together and paid a huge ransom to Adolf Eichmann to secure the release of Szondi and his family. Then after World War II, Eichmann successfully fled and evaded capture until 1960, when the Israeli Mossad found him and captured him, brought him back to Jerusalem for trial. And at that point, he was given a couple of projective tests prior to his trial, pre-trial evaluation test, I guess. And one of those projectives was the SZONDI test. So the former prisoner now had his test used against Eichmann. In order to understand how the test works, you need to know something about the theoretical background. A lot of the information that I got for the theoretical background comes from the book by Susan Derry, who is a follower of Szondi and considered to she's considered to have essentially revamped the test for the American audience. And her book, Introduction to the Szondi Test, was published in 1949 with a foreword by Szondi. And she gives a lot of detailed information about how to score the test. And it's not an easy test to score. So first and foremost, you need to know that there are 4 vectors, each with 2 factors. And so in total, you'll have 8 factors. And these 8 factors represent the different factors of personality. Other viewpoints on personality in the early 20th century were that personality had 2 factors or possibly 3 factors. And then later with Cattell in the 1960s, he proposed 16 factors. Eysenck started with 2 and then went to 3 factors. And others had other viewpoints. Freud had 2 factors. But Szondi proposed that there were 8 factors. And so you have 4 different vectors of personality, each with 2 factors. And it works like this. The sexual vector is divided up into homosexual and sadist. One thing to understand, and this is really important, is that the terms as they were used and understood by Szondi and Zondi's school of followers did not mean the same thing that we think of them as being today. They didn't even mean the same thing as other people at the time thought. And you'll see how that plays out, I think, at least to some extent. If you take sadist, for example, in the modern conceptualization, and even back then, the word sadist was interpreted to mean individuals who take pleasure in inflicting pain on others. However, as the term sadist is used by Szondi, it means muscular energy, the need to be strong, and in some cases, aggression, which could be socially acceptable forms of aggression, like going to a boxing match or sporting event, or something more nefarious, like criminal activity. The paroxysmal vector is divided up into epileptic and hysteric. And again, these terms don't mean the same thing. If I skip back up to the sexual vector, homosexual, for example, in the system simply indicates tenderness, yielding, femininity, passivity. And everyone is thought, according to the system, to have each one of these in greater or lesser amounts. The epileptic factor is the building up of the need for expression of something, such as with a sudden emotional outburst. It doesn't mean anything about, people with epilepsy as we understand it today, having epileptic seizures. There's no reference to that at all in the Zondi system. The term hysteric, which, at that point in time had a very specific meaning and understanding, the way that Zondi used it was a little bit different. We don't even use this term today. It's, considered to be outdated and a misdiagnosis or misnomer of what's going on with an individual. But the way that Zondi considered it is that it's the expression of libido, affection, possibly outbursts of affection, and in some cases conversion disorder, which is what people at the time thought hysteria to be. Just that last one, conversion disorder. Schizophrenic vector, again, nothing to do with schizophrenia. The catatonic or K factor is the avoidance of emotional bonds, whereas the paranoid factor is the juxtaposition of ego and id, drawing again from the Freudian psychodynamic perspective, but adapting it to this new model. And the projection of one's wishes would be categorized under paranoid, which doesn't really make sense to me, but okay. And then the contact vector, or circular vector, is divided into depressed, which is from the Freudian psychodynamic arena. It's the anal stage of development, expressed as possessiveness and need for orderliness. The manic stage, which is the oral stage of development, where you might have a lot of eating, talking, or shouting expressed by the individual. Okay, so that's the basic underlying theoretical background that personality is built into these 8 factors, which are linked to 4 vectors. And people have all of these different factors to greater or lesser extents, and the Zondi test is supposed to measure this. Zondi endorsed the psychoanalytic defense mechanisms and thought that these things could be measured using cards, photographs. I'll show you those photographs in a moment. And he argued that there's a genetic link to these factors and that they were all elements of personality. And in spite of being personality-based, changes occur frequently as the individual drains the need or builds up unfulfilled desires and wishes within that area. And so in that sense, it's similar to the Freudian model of catharsis. They also thought that people could be suited to different professions based on the factor profiles. Freudian model of catharsis is simply this, that as you have, the Freudian theory of aggressive behavior, you have this reservoir or well that keeps building up. That's the bucket on top fills with this need for expression of aggressive behavior. In Freud's model, it would be thanatos, the death instinct. And eventually the pressure is going to get high enough so that you have to have an outburst of aggression. There's some ways in which you can do this in a socially acceptable way, like going to see a sporting game, that's violent, or maybe going to a violent movie. And that, according to theory, would reduce the person's need for expression of the aggressive desire. Of course, that doesn't work. If you take a whole bunch of aggressive juvenile delinquents and take them to a horror movie, it's not going to make them less aggressive. So that's a different thing. So looking at the Zondi test itself, I searched a number of years ago. I was searching for a copy of the Zondi, and I scoured eBay seriously for 2 years. This is before you could have automatic notifications on eBay to let you know that the thing you're looking for has shown up. So whenever I remembered For the course of about 2 years, I searched eBay to see if anybody was selling the Zondi, and I eventually found a copy for about 25 bucks. It is hard to find. There's been a copy on eBay for a few years that's listed at about 240, 250 bucks. But it's not worth that, of course, because you can't use it for anything today other than, an artifact of psychology. But this is the actual test. When you get the test, open it up, you see that you've got some score sheets and some weird looking photographs. And these are like little playing card type things, stiff cardboard photographs of individuals who were institutionalized in the 1910s and 1920s and used for the test. And I'll show you how all of this works. Each of these cards has, if you flip it over, it's got information on the back, and you can see the letter in the top right-hand corner, the E and the M. Well, those refer to the factors. Those refer to the actual factors that face belongs to. So if I go back, I should have had another copy of this particular part of the PowerPoint, but you can see the different letters here. So epileptic is E and manic is M. Those are the letters on the back of the cards. So you have one photograph for each of these factors. One photograph for each factor. And the way that it works is that the person has to choose. You have 6 sets of 8 cards. Each card represents a different factor, and when you administer the test to somebody, the person who's being tested has to select the 2 cards that they like the most and the 2 cards that they like the least. So if you're a person like me, you're going to select the people who look happiest, and you're going to, as the ones that you like, and you're going to select the people who look angry or mean as the people that you don't like. I think that's kind of normal, but what do I know? Maybe that reveals something insidious about my personality. And for this particular set of cards, I added the letters on here. So the first one is M, the second one is P, and so on. These numbers and letters do not appear on the face of the card. The face of the card just has the photograph. But if I wanted to, I could use these numbers to actually test groups of people, which I did, once or twice just for fun, and calculated their scores. So maybe I should do that, do an article on it. So here's the second group. There are 6 groups, and you can see that these people are all kind of funny looking. It's because they're all institutionalized individuals whose faces were used without their permission, institutionalized in the 1910s and 1920s. Pretty sure that when I was administered the test, I must have liked number 3 on this page just because he's got just an awesome mustache. I really like that guy. And I probably did not like number 1 because he looks like a real mean dude. So you get the idea. Here's group 4, group 5, and group 6. So when the test administrator administers the test, you have to keep a log of which cards the person likes and which ones they don't. And then you tabulate it up. And then the scoring system works like this. If you have 4 or more cards in either direction on one factor, the maximum number of times that a person selects a factor would be 6 because there's 6 groups. If you have selected as either cards that you like or don't like 4 or more cards in that factor, then you're said to have tension in that area. If you have 2 or more in the same direction, and it would have to be more than in the opposite direction. So if you had 1 negative and 3 positive for one factor, then that would be loaded in the positive direction. If you have a balanced number of likes and dislikes, no matter how many they are, that's considered open. Plus is more likes than dislikes with at least 2 in that direction. And so there's kind of an overlap between loaded and plus and minus, and also between open and drained. It's not a clear system of assignment of these attributes to the cards. It is complicated. Minus is more dislikes than likes. That indicates a drive state or need that isn't satisfied. If you have no choices on a factor, that indicates that whatever that factor is, you're satisfying it quite well on your own. So if you're stuck on a particular phase that, and you can't satisfy that drive, then you're going to have a whole lot of cards selected on that one. And according to Susan Derry in her 1949 book on the Zondi, care must be taken in interpreting an open or drained response, since the same pattern can indicate either a socially acceptable discharge, like a scientist criticizing others, this is her example, or an unacceptable way of discharging that drive state, as in a murderer killing victims. And so these are two profiles that I scanned from Derry's book. Figure 2 is a social scientist, a 40-year-old woman who criticizes the way that the community is set up because she is trying to improve social justice for underserved parts of the community. And so you can see that on the sexual vector, S for sadism factor, this particular social scientist has an open response. You have one positive and one negative selection of the card faces. And so that would be a socially acceptable way of showing this particular drive state. Whereas on the figure 3 on the right, a 17-year-old male accused of murder, and you have the same pattern for that sadism vector. And in that case, that person has committed murder, and that's why it's drained. Then here you see that you have one of the actual profile pages from the Zondi test that I purchased off of eBay that's been filled out. And apparently the copy that I got was somebody's practice test manual or test kit that they were using in the 1940s. One of the pages is dated 1949. So the score sheet provides room for 10 testing sessions. The idea is that you give the test at regular intervals to the individual under analysis. And then at the very bottom, you can see that there's this kind of complicated way of tabulating all the pluses and minuses. I'm not going to go through the bottom part down here because it's kind of tricky to do. And it requires multiple repetitions of testing. But we can take a closer look at this one. This one is for Wendy. And so using the various different sources of information that I could find on the Zondi, including some more recent publications, because there are some people in Europe who still use it, which is quite shocking to me because it doesn't seem to have adequate psychometric properties. You can see that this person here, Wendy, has positive values. She selected 4 positive scores for the H factor on the sexual vector and 4 positive for the S factor, that's homosexual and sadism, in the sexual vector. And then she's got open responses for both the epileptic and hysteric, and then a negative response on each of these, the catatonic and paranoid. And then the depressed and manic, you have open and negative. And so these ones are pretty strong. If you have 4 selected and they're all in the same direction, that's pretty strong. And based on the information that I've been able to glean from the different sources, this would be the diagnosis for Wendy. Very strong need for femininity and masculinity, which is described as being normal. I don't understand, because I thought if you had a whole bunch in the same direction, that would be problematic. So the sources of information don't seem to align with the way that even Susan Derry says that it's supposed to be analyzed. But that's one of the problems with the test itself. Then you have for the paroxysmal vector disintegration, every effective stimulus is absent. No moral censorship. All has been discharged or spent. So Wendy's busy at work doing whatever she needs to do in those factors. So there's no need to be fulfilled because she's doing an adequate job on her own. For the schizophrenia vector, she denies wish projection, unrestrained urge for detachment, okay, and then psychotic, amorous, aggressive, depreciation, perverted sadism. I don't know how you could really get all that from Wendy, from these faces, but okay. And then in the same test kit that I have, here's one for Pa, and here's the date. Actually, it's 1948, not 1949. So we have an exact date on which Pa was administered tests twice, 12 days apart. So that's nice. We've got test retest, and we can take a look at that. We can't calculate any test retest reliability from it because that would take group testing. But for this one individual, we can see that the pattern is not the same. And in the Zondi way of testing things, it's all right to have irregularities from time 1 to time 2 in terms of the patterns that you see. Why? Because they say, well, that person has discharged whatever that need is, and so they're, it's not in tension anymore. But here we can see that at least in test time 1, Pa has a really strong catatonic reaction with the K factor having all 6 negatives that are possible. So he's really positive, really got something going on there. And then depression, we've got some positives for depression. We've got 3 positives. And then you've got loaded with a homosexual sadist, hysteria, and paranoid schizophrenia. But again, these terms don't mean the same thing that we understand them to mean today. And open are epileptic and mania. So he's taking care of the epileptic and mania urges or drive states adequately on his own. And then we get this profile, strong need for femininity and masculinity, same as Wendy. And again, that's considered to be normal, but I don't understand because I thought if you had tension, it would be problematic. For the P vector, self-concealment, ideas of reference, obsessed with perverted demands, perpetual seeking without attachment, and overall, he's described as obsessional, homosexual impulses, destructive, sadistic urges. Wow. But at time 2, everything changes. At time 2, the profile changes, and now he's got excessive need for personal tenderness. Self-concealment, ideas of reference stayed constant. Denies wish projection, completely disloyal. But overall, urge for love, in search of, and also concealment, and withdrawing and melancholia. So, I mean, you got some massive swings from time 1 to time 2. What they would say, I guess, if you were in the school of following Zondi, is that it takes a trained practitioner to evaluate and interpret these cards. Okay, well, I like my tests to be ones where anyone who's given a fair amount of training can administer the test and figure out what it means, that I don't have to be a member of the cult to understand it. Here's another one. So this is a more modern, you can see it's dated 1997. And this is actually the test as it was administered to me. And the reason why it was administered to me in 1997 was because I was a grad student and I picked up a consulting gig to analyze the statistics for the Zondi test. And the reason, the way in which that happened is that I was in Philadelphia and the Court Mental Health Clinic in Philadelphia, the criminal trial court in Philadelphia, in Center City, had a linked clinical psychology clinic where all the different offenders who would be coming to trial had to get pretrial psychological evaluations. And there were a couple of practitioners there at that time in the 1990s who were still using the Zondi. If anyone from the Court Mental Health Clinic in Philadelphia listens to this, maybe you know what I'm talking about. I won't mention any names, but they were still using the Zondi test as late as 1997. And the two practitioners who were there were older, and they were definitely old school, and they hired me to analyze the data. And so the red numbers are my own numbers, my numbering system, so that I knew which card was which, knew which selection was which. And I had to have them give me, administer the test to me so that I would know how it works. And I also asked them to make some predictions. That's what you see at the bottom. I asked them to make some predictions about what would be the profile for different types of criminals. And so we had some profiles that we tested for nonviolent uh, uh, felony offenders like burglars versus violent felony offenders like sexual assault, rapists, and so forth. And none of those worked out. I had to write my own code in SAS. I wish I still had my data because that would be really interesting to look at today. But somewhere along the line between 1997 and today, I lost the data. But it wasn't mine anyway. So, but I gave them the report after analyzing it. Nothing came out significant. It didn't work. And it was rather difficult to do it statistically. But I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at my own profile. So based on this and the way that I understand the Zondi to be scored using the same method that I did with Pa and Wendy, it says, I am lacking a sexual goal, desires to be a woman. I don't think that's true, but what do I know? And that I've got a concealment of accumulation of gross affect, exaggerated greed for power, egoism, and narcissism. Okay. Um, Pretty mild-mannered guy, actually. So I don't know about that. And then obsessive loyalty, disloyalty is completely severed. Urge for love, passivity, striving for attachment, anger, concealment, predatory. Wait, what? Persistent adherence to old amorous objects. Okay. Um, so, so that's me. But unfortunately, I was only tested at one time. So I don't have a comparison of time one and time two. But when they gave me the test, I had a rule, an internal rule, that I liked the guys who were, or not guys, but people. I liked the people who were smiling, and I disliked the people who looked angry. So what you're seeing here is the profile of a person who approached the test with that mindset that, I liked people who were smiling and I didn't like people who looked angry. And I think the important thing to keep in mind here is that at the criminal court mental health clinic in 1997, they were using the Zondi test with people charged with felonies. So while I was there, they were evaluating some guy who would slit his wife's throat and killed her using the Zondi test. Are you guys crazy? But yeah, so they wanted to know if it worked. I told them that it didn't work, statistically speaking, and they just kept using it anyway probably until they retired. So let's look at some of the psychometric evidence for it. There's not a whole lot of recent stuff because nobody uses it in the United States anymore. Cole in 1951 assessed 86 college students who were considered to be normal with 2 administrations of the Zondi providing test-retest. And of the 8 factors shown on the cards, participants switched factors, the factors that they loaded on 39% of the time. That's really low consistency. Again, the consistency doesn't bother the Zondians because they say, well, if a person satisfies the need, then it's discharged. Then, you're not going to have tension in that area. So they just ignore this. But I mean, I would think that if a person had attention in one area of life, that it would show up if you tested them a few days later. But no, we're seeing 39% of the factors totally switching in their loadings. And this amount of card selection change meant that card choice was so inconsistent that personality type would altogether change for a substantial minority, close to half. There was no test retest. The stats in these older publications, there is pretty rudimentary. Here's an individual, and this is again from the book, the test booklet, the test kit that I bought. And this one was tested 6 times, and you can see how much change there is. Every single one of them appears to be a bit different. There are a couple of consistencies here and there. I guess with the P factor looks drained in most of them, if not all of them. So whatever the paranoid faces look like, this person ES doesn't like those, or wasn't selecting them either way. Felt benign about it. But when I look at these faces, I just think people are guessing, or they're amused. Here's another study. Musin and Krauss used a sample of in 1952, a sample of 20 neurotics who were college students and 20 normal controls. The neurotic cases were assessed 6 times prior to treatment and 6 times after treatment. So that's a lot. And controls were tested 6 times total, with 1 day in between tests. They had a bunch of predictions based on Zondi's theory for different types for the neurotics and controls, and 22 more for the cases of post-therapy. So they had 41 predictions based on theory that they anticipated being shown by the Zondi profiles using the Susan Derry scoring system. And only one of them came out statistically significant. So it's a complete failure to distinguish between the groups, between pre-post therapy for cases. It's not looking good. That this examination would go to the validity of the test, not the reliability, but the validity. And then Klopfer and Borstelman in 1950, students from their classes examine the cards and write statements about any associations they saw on the cards one at a time. And so they're, what they're doing here is they're having people examine the cards and write down what they see in the person's face, what comes to mind. So, if you have a stimuli that's being used therapeutically, if you think of the thematic apperception test, the cards and the TAT tend to evoke specific types of things. I don't have any examples of the thematic apperception test to show on this PowerPoint, but if you know that test, you know that the drawings that are used in the thematic apperception test tend to evoke certain types of feelings or thoughts in the individuals that are being given the projective test. So you would anticipate that the faces that are being used on these cards, these 6 sets of 8 cards, if you've got a sadistic face or paranoid face, you would anticipate that people who are giving their impressions of those faces, different people would see the same thing. So that's what this study is trying to measure. Klopfer and Borstelman then, plus a third professor, became raters or judges of the student-generated interpretations of the cards. And the inter-rater reliability of the judges was only 58 to 65%. So that's exceptionally low. So they couldn't categorize the student-generated information in a reliable way. It was so unreliable, so all over the place. And this shows that the projective statements based on the cards were largely unclassifiable in terms of matching any given factor to, type-oriented information that are drawn from the subjects. One last one, Lubin and Malloy, using a clinical sample of 100 diagnosed inpatients, administered the Zondi to each. The authors reasoned that each type of card appeared 6 times, and a person liking or disliking a sadist in a set of in set 1 ought to have the same reaction in other sets. So if you disliked the person who looks mean in group 1, you should be more likely to also dislike the person who looks mean in group 2. And the way that they set it up, they said that they had 150 significance tests, and the vast majority of the tests were non-significant, showing that the pattern of card choices, in their view, tended to be overwhelmingly random. And that invalidates a core component of the test itself. You're not really pulling things consistently from personality if people tend to be responding in a random way. And you can't rule out that you have some kind of response set, that the person approaching the cards who's been given the test, as a subject, thinks that the people with mustaches look cool, and because they're old-timey, old-fashioned mustaches. So I'm going to like the people with mustaches, or I'm not going to like the people who look angry, or who look like they would be bad people to talk to. Who knows what the people are responding to in these cards? It's a projective test, but it's, the idea here is that it's somehow systematized, and we're not seeing any patterns emerge from the system that they set up. So, summarizing these 4 different studies from the early 1950s, there's low consistency in test-retest reliability. Very few of the predictions are significant. The inter-rater reliability is very low, and no evidence for consistency of card types within a single administration. And it just doesn't look good. So my recommendation would be, don't use this test. It's an artifact of the time. It's part of the history of psychology, I think. And it's an interesting artifact, but people shouldn't be trying to diagnose using it. My understanding is that there are still some followers of the Zondi school of thought in Europe. There is a semi-annual Zondi conference in 2024. The Zondi conference was held in Leuven, Belgium. And I wish I could have attended. I would have liked to go and hear what they had to say. Also, I love Belgium. So, it's a great time for a trip. But maybe in 2026, I'll see where they're having their conference and see if I can attend. Maybe I'll even get to be a speaker. Who knows? Thanks for listening. I hope that you found this interesting. It's interesting to me, and it's even more interesting because I know that, at least in terms of the 1990s, people were using it to evaluate criminal offenders going into their pretrial evaluations for competency and other issues for trial. Thanks for listening. Talk to you later.